New Zealanders should feel really good about the fact that police are picking up a...
Kia ora koutou katoa. Good afternoon and assalamu alaikum. I'm pleased to announce that Cook Islands Prime Minister Mark Brown will visit New Zealand next week from the 25th of March to the 3rd of April. He'll be the first international leader to visit New Zealand since the COVID-19 border closure. While we have personally met before in the Cook Islands, I look forward to welcoming Prime Minister Brown on his first visit to New Zealand as Prime Minister. 2 years ago today, 51 New Zealanders' lives were taken in the March 15 mosque attack. Our thoughts continue to be with the victims, injured survivors, families, and all those affected by the events of that day. I know we're all committed to ensuring such an attack never happens on our soil again. And for our part, that's why we've put in place an extensive program of work to implement the recommendations of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the attack, for which Minister Little is playing the role as lead coordinating minister and is available for questions should you have them. But first, we listened. Since the release of the Royal Commission, we've held 33 hui nationwide with members of our Muslim community, pan-ethnic and multi-faith communities. We learnt much from those hui, and I want to thank everyone who took the time and travelled across regions to participate and share their thoughts in a frank and open manner. We heard that there are some responses to the Commission that are immediate and that we need to just get on with, and some where we need to continue to design solutions with the community themselves. In the short term, we're establishing a $1 million Community Engagement Response Fund to help more people engage with the work that we'll be doing on the Royal Commission. Most community representative groups involved in the Royal Commission engagement are non-profit and have unpaid voluntary staff. This fund will support them to stay involved as we work to implement the Commission's findings, and it was one of the things that communities asked for us to implement. We're also setting up an advisory group to ensure the timely and effective and accountable implementation of the government's response, also something that was asked for. We're establishing a collective impact board which will enable affected whānau of March 15 to guide and advise on the services required to support their long-term recovery needs. This, of course, sits alongside individual case management, which we've also worked to improve, recently bringing together MSD, ACC and immigration staff under one roof, with access to dedicated work brokers for those families directly impacted by March 15. Again, something the community has asked for. And we've set up an Ethnic Communities graduate program aimed at increasing diversity in the public sector. Applications for the first 2021 cohort are open now. We've also extended the Safer Communities Fund, with $3.2 million available to provide more communities with funding to upgrade and implement security measures intended to reduce vulnerabilities and give a greater sense of security and safety. Our longer-term work program covers issues of hate speech and our national security architecture. And obviously several other significant actions have followed since March 15. Shortly after the attack, the government banned all types of semi-automatic weapons and assault rifles in New Zealand. There's also been significant progress on the Christchurch Call, which aims to ensure that we prevent online platforms being used in the way they were on March 15. 50 countries and international organisations now support the call, and for the first time, governments and major tech companies are working together. We've established crisis protocols, and the Global Internet Forum for Counter-Terrorism is now a standalone entity. Last week, I spoke to President Macron of France. He too is pleased with the progress to date, but we both believe there is more to do, and the call gives us a platform to do that work, including domestically. Here in New Zealand, legislation which would make live streaming objectionable material a crime punishable by up to 14 years in prison or a fine of up to $200,000 passed its first reading in Parliament last month and will now go through a select committee process. I'm committed to ensuring that New Zealand continues to play a strong role in countering violent extremism. And, of course, we all remain absolutely committed to honouring the 51 lives lost on March 15. Shukran lakum. Happy to take your questions. Feel free to step up to the podium, Minister Little.
So it's on another matter. Are you aware of a 15-year-old being deported from Australia?
Yeah, look, I've only, as a result of some of the inquiries from members of the media, I've only just become aware of the fact that I'm told or advised that within the group of 501s that we had returned recently that there was what we would consider to be a minor in that group. I have asked for a briefing on that. I don't have full details, but of course, you know, we would have an expectation that regardless of the background, that we do treat minors in a particular way when we're dealing with deportation.
Is it even legal to deport minors in this way, and what support is being offered to the teenagers?
As you'd expect, you know, officials that have responsibility for dealing with cases that involve minors, as I understand, are involved. But I do want to, you know, go back and look at the circumstances under which this deportation happened, because we do want to make sure that, particularly when we're dealing with young people, that, you know, that's being dealt with appropriately, regardless of the circumstances of their deportation.
We know that there is a teenager who was on that flight. Does that make Peter Dutton's comments even more reprehensible?
Oh, well, look, obviously I didn't agree with what he did at the time. We've never agreed with the policy, in fact. And so I maintain that position. Again, you know, regardless of the circumstances, when you're dealing with minors, you know, is it appropriate to have them in these circumstances and deported in that way? But look, we will be going back and looking at the details involved here.
Will you also be talking to Prime Minister Morrison?
Barry.
Will you also be talking to Prime Minister Morrison about it?
Look, I haven't got a specific... we actually don't tend to schedule calls. He knows my position on the deportation policy. So actually, regardless of whether or not we're dealing with a minor or whether or not we're dealing with someone who's older, I have a specific objection to the fact that we have people being deported from Australia who we consider to be Australians. Now, I don't have the specific details of this particular individual, but it is a minor, and I would expect particular care to have been taken in the way that a minor is dealt with.
Would you not have expected to have known about this, given the nature of this policy and the...
Oh, look, I would expect our officials to know, yes. Not necessarily, I don't get a breakdown every time there is a flight of 501s. I don't personally get a breakdown of the profile of those people being deported. But I would expect, and we have worked very hard to say to our Australian counterparts, even though we object to this policy, the least we can do is make sure we've got a protocol where we know where they're coming, we know what offences apply, and we know the profile of those being deported.
Do officials know in this case?
Look, that's why I don't want to go too far. I've only just been briefed on this. I know certainly that at this point, right now, those who need to know do, but how much advance notice I would need to check.
Are you aware of any minors being deported previously?
This has been an issue raised before. I would need to go back and look at the ages, but this has been an issue raised before, and we've also raised our objections before as well.
And those who need to know knew about it?
As in the specific agencies that would be dealing with young people on the New Zealand side.
Did you rush the Fu Martau jet?
No. No, in fact, I think that was rushed as the last way that anyone in this gallery has described that decision. It obviously took quite some time and quite a lot of thought, because we wanted to make sure that we didn't create a precedent, and we wanted an enduring solution.
So you didn't rush it in the final throes?
No, not at all. Again, it was something that we spent a significant amount of time developing.
And are you comfortable with how the deal was done?
Yes, I am. Different departments will take different views, but we are very comfortable with the position we took.
Australia's looking at
And then I'll come to you, Henry.
Australia's looking at a bubble with Singapore now. How would that affect our talks?
So, look, I think, you know, this is one of the reasons why original talks with our counterparts in Australia were at a country-by-country level. And so that's the initial formulation. That's because we wanted to deal with issues like how would we deal with transit passengers? Where would they quarantine if they needed to before then travelling between Australia and New Zealand? Who would be eligible in terms of residency status? What would be the process would go through if either country wanted to bring in a third country? So that was why we had been trying to negotiate an Australia-New Zealand arrangement, not a state-by-state arrangement. Obviously, things have shifted. So we're now having to reconfigure our entire formulation, and that's the position we're in now, and that's the work that we're doing now.
Does it make it look more unlikely for us?
Look, not necessarily, because first of all, I'd say that Singapore have been floating the idea of opening up to New Zealand and Australia for some time. What I'd be interested in is how this is being received by different states, because, you know, obviously Queensland, if I'm correct, still doesn't have an opening with New Zealand right now, so that gives you a sense of their risk appetite. So it is not changing the work that we are doing. If Australia makes the decision to open up and we think that that poses risk to us, then we'll reconsider what our arrangements look like.
The fact is now
Look, Henry, I just promised I'd come to you.
Cannabis, Prince Five always said Labor will treat it as a conscious issue. For you personally, would decriminalising cannabis be seen as a rejection of the referendum, or are they separate issues?
Oh, look, we've seen them as, I do see them as separate issues. Decriminalisation, just a rung below in that regard. But for us, any time a members' bill comes up, we will take it to caucus. Caucus will determine whether or not they see it, therefore sitting as a conscious vote, and therefore whether individual members will vote according to their conscience.
Have you set out a process yet for how to deal with bills that are not yet been pulled from the ballot?
We wait until...
Have a MP seeking support to get that?
No, so we always wait for a bill to be pulled, because otherwise you're debating in caucus a hypothetical of 120 bills that could just sit there for a very long time.
So does that mean that no Labor, non-executive MPs are allowed to publicly back other parties' members' bills? Because there's a new process that allows bills to skip the ballot at 61.
Then in that case, I would imagine we would just bring that process to caucus and have that discussion. Yeah. I don't see it as insurmountable at all. Ben, I'll come to you.
On the bubble, you previously said that one of the biggest issues that is preventing the Australia-New Zealand bubble from happening is what's to do with stranded passengers. If there was an outbreak.
One of the complications, but yeah.
Do you consider that to be the primary issue at this stage?
No, look, it's...
What are the other issues? Just can you get a sense of what is holding it back?
Yeah, well, as I've just described, we were working previously on a completely different negotiation, an arrangement that was between New Zealand and Australia, one where we were seeking consensus on, because there are actually a number of complicating factors. I mean, who's eligible to travel, because New Zealand and Australia have different rules around who are able to come into their countries. Are they still able to participate in the Trans-Tasman quarantine-free arrangements? What would you do if another country wants to open up and you want to set up a third bubble or a fourth bubble? Those were all things we were working through in those protocols. Since then, obviously, we've had states open up. So, look, we're starting again with those plans. And that's fine, but it does mean we need to set up different protocols to work around that and make that work. One of the things to keep in consideration is, it's perhaps at the moment you don't hear a lot of people raising issues about being stranded, but I can guarantee if we had a two-way quarantine-free arrangement, you would certainly hear if we had issues in Australia that caused us to take a pause and shut down flights, you would certainly hear concerns around people being stranded. So we need to be prepared for how we would manage that, particularly if people needed to get home.
Regarding the mosque attack, what support is still available for the women who lost husbands during the mosque attack, and has there been any additional programs or funding gone towards those women?
Minister Little has had the most recent engagement, so very aware of some of the individual issues being raised. So I'll ask him to speak to that.
There is ongoing support in the mental health area. Additional funding was provided to the Canterbury District Health Board to provide ongoing trauma support, and support was also available through the Ministry of Social Development. One of the reasons we've set up the Collective Impact Board, that came out of the consultations we held at the end of last year after the release of the report, when a lot of the families were saying that support that had been provided to them in the immediate aftermath of the terrorist attack was no longer there. We wanted it to be there, and we thought it was important that we bring together not only the senior officials from the relevant departments that have been providing that support, but actually members of the community who sit alongside those officials, so there's a level of accountability and those officials can hear directly from the community what ongoing support is needed.
Mental health support, has there been any sort of social support helping get people into work or teaching people what kind of jobs they can go into? Because I know some women have never worked in their lives.
It's actually been, in fact, with the individual case management, we've had, quite a range of different programs available and responses available depending on needs. So we've had everything from driver training programs to make sure people have the independence to be able to transport themselves because they, may have lost that within their household. There's been issues around financial literacy and support as well, opening bank accounts, a whole range of things that we've tried to make available if that's been needed. And equally, as I just mentioned, a request for a specific work broker support. And so that's something we're bringing into the individual case management as well. Anything further that you want to?
I think that's, and
Yeah.
we know there will be ongoing needs, and the role of the Collective Impact Board is to make sure that those needs are heard, those requests are heard, and that everything that can be done is being done to provide that support.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you're moving fast enough on recommendations of the inquiry, and I guess how would you sum up the progress made so far?
Yeah, so if I'll give a general view, and then I'll again hand over to Minister Little. You know, when you read the Royal Commission, you get a real sense of the emphasis on things like our national security architecture and some of the redesign there. When you go and talk to the community, they still talk about things like, you know, what's affecting them in their day-to-day lives, whether or not their children are going to school and experiencing discrimination, whether or not they have work opportunities. So I think there is a real job for us to do to make sure we're prioritising the things that are affecting people's daily lives, or not losing sight of the things the Royal Commission called on us to do around, for instance, national security and our legislative framework. So we've prioritised the things that we think will have an immediate effect, but still working through those issues that are bigger and more structural, but we need to take a bit of time on.
And on the issue, look, we've got the report at the end of November. We've taken the opportunity over January, February to consult widely, not just with the Muslim community in Canterbury, but the Muslim community around the country and other faith and minority ethnic communities. What is very important is establishing the Oversight Advisory Group, because that is a real point of accountability, and it's an opportunity for all those communities to have influence and to have a say, but most importantly to see the government following through on those recommendations, to feed in from their communities and to feed back from the government. So that's the work that's going in place at the moment. Some recommendations we can implement in a reasonably short time frame, others will take a lot longer, but that body will be there to provide that oversight and support.
Prime Minister, is it ethical for your MPs in Hutt South to have been running this sublease arrangement where they're charging taxpayers 4 times more for their rent than they're actually paying in rent, and keeping that money for the Labour Party?
Well, obviously, you know, the right person to make those judgments is not me. We need someone other than me making those calls, and that would, of course, be Parliamentary Services. They're the ones that approve whether or not they consider those lease arrangements to be appropriate.
But Parliamentary Services told us last week that they have no ability to look at anything other than their arrangement with the MP. They said, hey, look, it's below market rates, we're happy with that. They can't look into what's going on in the background, right? And I mean, you are the boss of these.
Yeah, well, essentially, you know, what Parliamentary Services are rightly mindful of is, does this represent value for money for the taxpayer? Are they getting something below market rent? They've made a declaration here that they are, and therefore are happy with the arrangement. And they're the ones that really need to keep that oversight on whether those arrangements are suitable.
But are MPs ripping off taxpayers here? They're taking thousands of dollars every year and giving it straight to the Labour Party.
Ultimately, this is a lease arrangement that, according to those who oversee all of our lease arrangements, has declared that it's below market value, therefore, in terms of the rent, and therefore, from their perspective, doesn't present a problem. Yeah, who am I not? Have I given the Herald? Jason?
The births, deaths and marriage bill is back in the headlines after Jan Tinetti said it was going to be a priority for her to pass it this year. Would you be able to walk us through what the process is from here and what Cabinet needs to do to get it across the line? Yeah, so probably, and I might have to give you the process from here in written form because I haven't refreshed where exactly we are, but what I can give you is what the problem was for us before. Last time, of course, we were partway through a process while it was at Select Committee, after it had received public submissions, the issue was raised around whether or not we were dealing with gender identity appropriately. The Select Committee understandably wanted to respond to that and put a proposal on the table to deal with it. The issue we had was, from my recollection, a Crown Law opinion that suggested that may be challenged or open to challenge because it hadn't gone through a full process. So what we need to do is essentially deal with the issue, but in such a way that we have the proper consultation so that the changes will stick. So that was 2 years ago, so Crown Law formed an opinion about how it can be legally airtight now.
Yep, and look, we had a different government then. Now we're with a fresh mandate and working through some issues that otherwise we weren't able to resolve last
Blame on
time.
New Zealand first for the
No,
hold-up.
no, not at all, not at all. But there were some complexities there that were taking a bit of time. You know, we've given a commitment that we believe we can resolve them.
By the end of the